In this demonstration, I'm going to show an example of how we can use two-dimensional arrays in functions and pass them as parameters. So before we get started, let me point out that there is a text file here, a resource file, which contains the name of 12 students, first name only. We're going to read this into a two-dimensional array, a 4x3 array, and then we're going to display it in a grid pattern as though we have a seating chart for a classroom. So we're going to start from the scratch. We're going to do this all in main at first, and then we're going to create a function and move some of the code into a function called fill array. All right, so let's get started. Oh. Using what we typically use. And I know I'm going to be reading in names, so I want to include string. And I'm going to use namespace standard. And I'll get my template set up here like I always do. All right. All right, so I know I have a 4x3 seating grid, 4 rows and 3 columns. I'm going to set up constants for that, named constants. So number of rows is 4, and nope, let's do comma, and num columns is 3. And I'm going to declare my array. I'll call it the name array. And I'm going to do rows first and columns as my second dimension on the array. Now, I know that I want to read this in from a file. So I'm going to include fstream. That's the first step. And then I need to declare an object, a variable of type fstream. I'm going to call it namefile. And now I need to open the file and point to the exact file. So the name I'll use in my code is namefile. I want to open it, but this references exactly which file. Have to spell it exactly as it's spelled here. It's case sensitive. And this file, students.txt, must be stored in the same directory, the same folder where my source file is stored in order for this approach to work. Okay, and just because I know I'm going to need to do it later, let me close it. All right, we don't have to include the name of the file here because it already knows that name file is linked to students.txt. Okay, so that's good housekeeping. We close it up there. Okay, I'm going to fill the name array by reading it in from the students.txt file. So we know with a two-dimensional array, we want to use nested for loops. The outer loop should be for the row, the inner loop should be for the columns. So I'll set this up int I equals 0. As long as I is less than num rows, we're going to keep iterating, and I'm going to iterate, oops, plus plus. Okay, so that's for each row. Now, for int j, this is for the columns. J less than num columns. Having problems typing today. Let's slow down. All right, that is a nice nested for loop structure for my arrays where I'm going to read it in by row and by columns. I've got 4 rows and 3 columns. And what I want to do is read it from the name file, not from CN. I want to read it into the name array, which has 2 subscripts, the row first and then the column. All right, simple nested for loop to read in the names. 12 names here. It's going to read in the first 3 names in row 0, next 3 names in row 1, the next 3 names in row 2, and the next 3 in row 3. And I should say index 0, 1, 2, and 3. We know it's row 1, 2, 3, 4, but the index in our C++ starts counting at 0. Okay, we read it in. Well, now let's see if we can display it. All right. Now, I know I want a similar nested for loop structure to display it. I just want to use a cout statement here. So I'm actually going to save some time and just copy this and paste it below and then clean it up. So here I want to display the seating chart. All right. But instead of reading it in, I want to do a cout. And I want to set the width. I want it to look a little bit nicer, so I'm going to put it in a column that's 10 characters wide. All right, but in order to use set width, right now it's undefined. It's because I have to include the library. Okay, I've included iomanip, so now it knows what set width is all about. Okay, now I want to output the name in a column 10 characters wide, and every time I finish a row, I want to end the line. So let me see, clean this up a little bit. All right, so for each row, I cycle through and I'll output 3 names in a column 10 characters wide each time. And then when I'm done, I move to a new line. I get my next row and I output 3. Let's see if it works the way I'm hoping it will. And there we go. 4 rows, 3 columns. Catherine's the longest name, which is 9 characters. There's only 1 space here. You might want to change set width to set 11 or 12. Might look a little bit nicer, but it works. All this is done in main right now. Now, suppose I want to move this into a function. I want to clean up main. I want main to only consist of function calls. So call the fill array and call the display seating chart function. Okay, 2 functions. So let's create one of these together, and the second one will be left to you as an exercise to do this one on your own. So we want this code to be in a function. All right, so let's get started. I know this is a void function because I know I'm passing my array. It by default is passed as reference because we passed the memory address of the array. All right, so I'm going to call this fill array. Why not? Oh, I don't need. Or let's be more specific. Fill name array. Or you could call it input names. Whatever works for you. And I've got 1 parameter. I'm going to pass the name array, but it's a 2-dimensional array. So there's something that's a little different here than what we've seen in the past. I know I have 2 dimensions. C++ requires that we provide a constant here for this second dimension. When I use my for loops, it will know what the first dimension is, but I can't leave it blank, and I can't even include it as a parameter. I have to include it here, right? So I have to include a 3, but we know we have a number or we have an identifier for that number. It's called num columns. So let's use num columns. Still a problem. So it doesn't know what num columns is. It's undefined. So this is one of the only cases where it's good style to use global constants for the bounds of the array. So I'm going to move this into the global space, take it out of main, and put it up here. Global constants. So now num rows and num columns are available. They're visible in any function that's contained in this whole project, right? Not just in main. It also means it's taking up memory for the entire runtime of the program. So the scope is the entire program, including all the functions. Scope means where is it visible? Where can it be used? It can be used anywhere. And lifetime refers to how long is it taking up space in memory. And the lifetime is from the time you hit run until return 0 is executed and it stops running. Okay, so we only want to use global variables and constants in limited circumstances, and this is one of them. So I'm going to allow it here. And we don't have any problem here because it's global, it can be used in the main, it could be used in any function. Okay, now it's a void function, so I don't need a return statement, but I'm going to take the code from main and cut it out, paste it down here, and then I might have to clean it up a bit. So I don't want this to happen in main. I want it to happen in the function. So let me cut it out of here and let me paste it in here. Okay, so my for loop is fine. It knows what num rows is because I made it a global constant. It knows num columns. All that's fine, but this is not happy here. Name file is undefined here. So when we think about our design, the only function that needs to use the file now is this function. So I want to move all my function statements all my file statements into the function. So here and here, I'm going to cut that out. All right, I declare a variable, a name file of type fstream, and I open it. And let's put the close statement down below as well, because see now main doesn't know what name file is. So let's cut that out. All right, so now I have fill name array. It has one parameter, a two-dimensional array called name, which contains strings. It contains 12 strings, and I know that because num rows was set to 4 and num columns was set to 3. I created a variable for the file name. I opened up that file and I linked it to the students.txt file, and my nested for loop is going to fill up that name array. And I'm going to close the file when I'm done. Once I fill up this array, I don't need that file anymore. I fill up the array, and when this function ends, because name is automatically, by default, a reference parameter, meaning it's passing the memory address, then main will be able to access that array as well. It can go right to the memory address where the name array starts. All right, so let me create my prototype, copy it, paste it, and now I have to call it. I'm going to call it from here. So it's a void function. We call void functions by starting with the function name. And then my IntelliSense tells me I've got one parameter. It is a two-dimensional array that holds strings, and I provide the argument that satisfies that parameter. And all I give it is the name. I give it the identifier of the array, which happens to be name. So the name of the array is name, and that's how I call the function. Right? So I moved this down below. I needed to use constant here. So I made both of these global constants, which is okay in this instance. I moved all my file statements down here, and my nested for loop reads it in. So if I've done it right, everything will work just the same as it did before, but main's a whole lot cleaner. And there we go. It works exactly the same. All right, so that's an example of taking code from main, moving it into a function, and making sure that your two-dimensional array parameter has a constant as the second dimension. All right, I'm going to leave it to you as an exercise to create the next function, which is display seating chart.